This is a countdown of the 50 most influential people in Anderson's 150-year history, as determined by the Herald Bulletin and a panel of local history experts. This is our list. The top 50 most influential people in Anderson's history. And now, numbers 10 through 1. Number 10. Industrialist and businessman Charles Taylor Doxy.
We first learn of Doxy's appearance in Anderson in July of 1861. He enlists in a regiment here, the 19th Indiana, which was part of the Iron Brigade in the Civil War. And Charles Doxy serves with them for a while, then he resigns his commission. He's recommissioned in the 16th Indiana. He leads his regiment into Louisiana. And there he's wounded severely. He comes home and he recovers from the wounds, but he never returns to service. At that time, he turned his attention to politics and to business in Anderson. He'd saved his money throughout the war, and he invested that money in the stave and heading business in Anderson. He'd saved some $3,000 of his pay during the Civil War, and that was enough of a nest egg to invest and turned his small nest egg into a great deal of wealth through his investments. He's best known in Anderson for building the Doxy Opera House on Meridian Street, later occupied by the Banner Store. He also built several buildings at the corner of the intersection of 9th and Central Avenue. 3 of the 4 corners carried his buildings that he built. Very, very loved man in the city of Anderson, and when he passed away at the young age of 56, the whole city turned out for his funeral. He was so loved by the people.
Number 9. Community leader George Satterwhite.
This gentleman was known as the volunteer who never said no. And I mean, he really was involved in his community. Anytime, anywhere, any way that he could put himself to work. And he did. And he should definitely be recognized.
George Satterwhite, a black gentleman who lived next door to my mother and dad. If you ever want a good neighbor, you'd want to live next to George Satterwhite and his sweet wife. But he went on to be one of the founders of one of our medical services in Madison County, which serves people who fall through the cracks, who don't really get the conventional services. And George Satterwhite was a quiet man, but he was active in this area, and so benefits went to a lot of people that never knew George Satterwhite. So his work goes on today.
But he was in every group and a meeting, any type of group or meeting that was going to help our community, he was there. He'd give his 2 cents, but most of it ended up being worth quite a bit. He was also involved in NAACP, the Concerned Citizens, many church organizations. Mr. Satterwhite, I remember, he wasn't one of the ones that wear a lot of the shirts and ties, but he carried himself in the casual clothing. But you can always count, if you look out in the crowd, someone leading the banner, he was one of those who was there.
Number 8. Anderson College's first president, visionary John Morrison.
John Morrison, first president, founding president of Anderson College. I went to school when John Morrison was president of Anderson College. Here was a no-nonsense president, a college linked to the church, but he saw the church in a different light in a way, and he saw education as a big part of the church. Early years, some people in the church thought education, you could be too smart. John Morrison saw the blending of higher education and the Christian faith, and that set the basis for Anderson College, which became Anderson University.
Morrison guided the college through some difficult times in its infancy, starting with a challenge by some church leaders of the very need for such an institution. He brought Anderson College through the Great Depression and World War II, then encountered serious health problems of his own. In spite of it all, the college gained full accreditation by the North Central Association in the late 1940s and continued to expand from there. Morrison retired in 1958. During his last year, when I was a freshman, He encountered me and asked me if my father was Dean Bailey of Warner College in Texas. My dad indeed had been dean of that fledgling institution that Wilson had begun just as the Great Depression broke out, which torpedoed the college before it began. I thought it was really neat that the Anderson College president noticed an obscure freshman and paid attention to my background.
Number 7. Founder of Andersontown Indian Settlement, Chief William Anderson.
Chief Anderson, of course, was the son of a ferry boat captain and a squaw of the Delawares when they came here, and he grew up to be the chief of the tribe, and he has settled his tribe there on the bend there of White River.
And Chief Anderson at that time was a clan chief. There were 3 clans within the Delaware tribe, but he was a clan chief. But in 1806, Chief Anderson is elevated to the tribal chief, and that's a position he holds until his death in 1831. He refused requests by Tecumseh in 1811 to join a confederation of Indians who were trying to throw the settlers out of Indiana, basically out of Ohio, back into the Atlantic Ocean, if you will. He refused that request. And he also refused a request from the Miami in 1812 to join them against the British and the alliance of Indians at the Mississinewa. And before that, standing up for not entering the war, Governor William Henry Harrison rewards him by asking or letting his Delaware know that they're going to come up in this area and clean out the dissident Indians. And so the Delaware moved to Piqua, Ohio.
Number 6. Industrialist, state senator, and congressman Charles Henry.
Charles Henry was born in Hancock County, Indiana, and he came to Pendleton, the family did, in 1852. He was active in businesses in Anderson for a number of years. He served in the Indiana legislature, and he also served in Congress. But what he's best known for is the introduction of the interurban system to Indiana. He got the idea attending the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, where he noticed a way of moving people around at the fair through what they called an intramural system. Gave him the idea that if they could move people between points within the World's Fair, perhaps you could move people in a similar fashion between cities. So he comes back to Anderson, and in 1897 they form the Indiana Traction Company, and there are 5 investors. One of them, of course, is Charles Henry. And from that, the interurban system developed in Madison County out into the state. Wide network of interurban that lasted from 1897 till about 1941 here in central Indiana.
And now, a word from our sponsor. When we come back, numbers 5 through 1. The Top 50 Most Influential People in Anderson's History video series is sponsored by Luce Funeral Homes and Crematory. Family owned for 3 generations since 1979, Luce Funeral Homes and Crematory is everything you need in one location. Luce Funeral Homes and Crematory is located at 200 West 53rd Street in Anderson. Visit lucecares.com for more information. We're counting down the top 50 most influential people in Anderson's history. Here are numbers 5 through 1. Number 5. Anderson basketball legend and community leader, Johnny Wilson.
Johnny Wilson and I grew up on the west side, went to Shadeland School, eventually played basketball together in Anderson High School. Both went on to be professional athletes. Me in baseball and Johnny with the Globetrotters. We're still friends for over almost 80 years. Johnny Wilson was the forerunner for my experience of playing with Jackie Robinson for 9 seasons with the Dodgers. Now, in life, I think Johnny prepared me, and I think maybe I helped prepare Johnny. But it permeated itself in the community of Anderson. And we have very little problems in Anderson with some of the more severe race problems. And I think Johnny and I, without knowing it, just kind of represented this is the way you do it. And we were close friends and still are.
I met Mr. John Wilson maybe 10 years ago, but in the past I had heard so many wonderful things about him from people of his generation, and he was a true icon to the African American community. And when I met him, I was really surprised at how distinguished, educated, kind, thoughtful, just a gentleman, an all-round gentleman, Renaissance man. Good looking. I was very, very impressed with him. And he may not know it, and some of the younger generations may not know it, but the impact that he had on this community back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and on, I don't think he'll ever know.
And I was in my quarters, and guy came rushing in. He said, "Here, come on, the orderly room. I want you to listen to this Armed Forces radio." And so I did, and it was Anderson playing basketball against an Indianapolis team, and all they could talk about was jumping Johnny Wilson. And that's how I got acquainted with him. Of course, when I came back, why, it was, I got to know him quite well.
I just hope that people look back, and not look back for me as playing basketball or baseball, football, running track. Look back at me, a person that cares about the city, plus cares about the people, young people in this city. And like now I attend all the basketball games, not that I should be probably all of them, go home and away. I got a couple of friends, Benisa, Joe and Marilyn Benisa, they take me to all the games out of town and all the games at home. And I do that because I want the young people to see me sitting there and remembering that I had success playing, and maybe that'll bring something down with them.
Number 4. Auto industry leaders, the Remy Brothers.
Their two brothers was Perry and Frank. Built a factory over on 2nd Street, and it got bigger and bigger. They got into the making magnetos, and decided to build a big plant. They built a big plant out here on Columbus Avenue in 1904 that was successful, and it then kept getting larger, and but they had ups and downs, of course. And then in 1910, and they had realized their magneto business, we had to crank the car, was not going to last, so they sold out. They sold out for, I believe that price was $125,000, and they left.
Number 3. The people who made this town grow, the auto industry workers.
The auto workers of Anderson literally built the community to its apex in the middle of the 20th century. Before that, in the late 19th century, some of the world's first car makers were here in Anderson, and workers put out automobiles for the Buckeye Manufacturing Company and other companies that produced right here in Anderson. The auto industry in Anderson soon morphed into a parts production juggernaut, building on Remy Electric Company's affiliation with General Motors. During the 1940s, Anderson auto workers at Delco Remy and Guide Lamp played a particularly vital role in the war effort for the United States, providing parts for military vehicles and producing weapons components as well. In the mid-1970s, 25,000 people were working in Anderson's auto parts factories, and that's for a city that had a population of about 60,000. Thanks to the unions that represented them, these auto workers earned good money and benefits, and they pumped that money into the local economy and into projects like the building of Community Hospital. The auto parts factories sadly are now gone, but the legacy of the automakers remains as a point of pride for the entire community.
Number 2. Auto industry leader, Charles E. Wilson.
Came out to became the general manager of Delco Remy, and he's the one, of course, that he brought Guide Lamp to Anderson, to added on. He wanted to expand. He knew that that plant here should expand, but the people in Detroit were a little bit skeptical. But he went ahead and he actually built 2 more plants. he had a big circus in the one up there in Plant 6 in 1926. And people came from all over. Very few people ever seen inside a plant, but when the people got to see that it wasn't a dirty, oily, greasy place to work, why, they flocked here, and that people moved in to the Anderson area and worked here, and Remy grew and grew. A couple of the things, C.E. Wilson was involved with the bank president, Mr. Linfield Myers, and but their work got created Mounds Park.
And now, number 1 on the top 50 most influential people in Anderson's history. Major leaguer, businessman, and advocate for the special needs community, Carl Erskine.
Oh, Carl Erskine, he's one of my good friends. He lives right around the corner from me. And we've known Carl and Betty, and I respect them very much, not only for what he has done in his life, but the way he's still sharing it. And not only sharing it with his family, but he shares it with the community and with the state and the world, really, because he goes out and does so many things for Special Olympics now. And I don't think Special Olympics would be in Anderson the way it is if it weren't for Carl.
Well, of course, Carl is, means a lot to the community because of the name and the fact that he was active in Major League Baseball, which is a pro career, and that doesn't happen to very many people, and to be successful you have to be very good, and he was very good. And not only that, but he's active in the community and did well by Anderson, and made a lot of friends.
You know, Anderson was my home where I was born and raised. My wife was born and raised in Anderson. Our kids were raised in Anderson through the public schools. We went to First Baptist Church, and the old church and the church family was very, very important. But when I finished my baseball career, 10 years in New York and then 2 in LA, and came back to Indiana, I didn't have many opportunities in Anderson. I could have stayed in baseball, and several opportunities were in LA, New York, Chicago, St. Louis, not so much in Anderson. So I thought we were going to leave Anderson. But one day in church, I looked at the people I'd grown up with, where I was baptized, where we were married, where my kids were all baptized. I whispered to Betty as we sat in the pew one Sunday morning, "We're not leaving." It's the best move I never made, because I found so much right here in my hometown. So I had a couple of careers right here, and it was the best move I could have ever made, to stay in Anderson. And so I promote Anderson. I use TAF, try Anderson first. There's a lot of places you can shop. Hey, we might have it right here. So I live by that. So does my sweet wife Betty. And so Anderson has supported us. We've had a family of 4 children. Jimmy was our youngest, Down syndrome, at a time when there was not many services for special needs people. But Anderson was out front, really out front, in finding ways to create services and to fund services. And so now we have Hopewell Center. Hope and Well, a great combination, tied to the Hopewell Indians who were here 1,000 years ago. But Hope and Well, that represents Hopewell Center. This community was one of the early communities to have a campus of full services from infants through adulthood. So if you want to ask me about Anderson, I can talk to you about living here. I drive up and down the streets now in Anderson where I used to ride my bicycle. So it's like a real anchor for me and my wife, Betty, and our family.
Well, Carl and I go back, believe it or not, 78 years of friendship. We actually went to Shadeland together, played basketball at Shadeland, and actually Carl was the center on the basketball team at that time. I don't know what happened to his growth, but I outgrowed him in 2 years. Because when I was a 5th grader, he was a 6th grader. Then when we came to Central Junior High, I had passed him in height, and I become the center. And but Carl and I had been very, very close, to the extent that I was at his house quite a bit of the time, and great family. So, and I understand how Carl is the way he is because of his mom and dad were two wonderful people. And then, of course, Carl did a great job of in baseball. And coming back to Anderson, he's did a great job when he's at the bank, and he's doing a great job to this day. One of the finest individuals in this city.
That's it for numbers 10 through 1 of the top 50 most influential people in Anderson's history. Visit heraldbulletin.com to see the rest of our list.